All right, let's get right into it. You know, history is just littered with wars that were supposed to be quick, clean, and, limited. But what happens time and time again? They spiral. They become these massive, devastating conflicts that nobody saw coming. We're going to dig into why that happens, and it really comes down to this critical flaw in how leaders think, the strategic underestimation of escalation. I mean, this is the big question, right? A leader decides on what they call a limited action. They think they know exactly how it's going to play out. But then they find themselves caught in a conflict that just gets bigger and bigger, reshaping the world and costing an unbelievable number of lives. So what is it? What goes so wrong in that very first calculation? Well, this whole problem actually has a name. It's called strategic underestimation of escalation. And look, it's not just one single mistake, it's more like a perfect storm of things going wrong all at once. You've got these psychological traps baked into a leader's own mind, you have bad information, and then you have all this political pressure pushing them to do something. And it all leads to this massive misjudgment about what could happen next. To really get a handle on this, we have to go way back to the legendary military thinker Karl von Clausewitz. He basically said that war by its very nature is pure chaos. He talked about friction, which is his way of saying that anything that can go wrong probably will. And then there's the fog of war, where getting clear, reliable information is next to impossible. This messy, unpredictable environment, that's the fertile ground where these miscalculations take root. So why do leaders with all the information and advisors in the world get this so wrong so often? Well, we can break it down into three big areas that the source material points to, what they call the mind, the map, and the machine. Let's take a look at each one. First up, the map. Now, this isn't a literal physical map. We're talking about the strategic models and theories that leaders use to plan their moves. They're supposed to be these reliable guides. But the problem is, sometimes these maps are just dangerously wrong. They can lead you straight off a cliff without you even realizing it. And here's a perfect example of one of those maps. It's called the escalation ladder. The idea is that conflict moves up rung by rung. A leader might think they're taking a small, controlled step, right? Like a single surgical strike. But here's the catch. Their opponent might see that same exact action as a massive provocation, causing them to jump 3 rungs in response. And just like that, you're both way closer to all-out war than anyone ever planned to be. Okay, so next we have the mind. Because no matter how smart or experienced a leader is, they're still human. And under the unbelievable stress of a crisis, our brains have these built-in glitches, biases and mental shortcuts that can seriously warp judgment and lead to some truly terrible decisions. This chart just lays out these mental traps perfectly. You've got optimism bias. That's the classic, oh, don't worry, the troops will be home by Christmas delusion. Then there's confirmation bias, which is where leaders only listen to the intelligence that confirms what they already want to do. And of course, the big one, groupthink. That's when everyone in the room is too afraid to speak up and challenge a bad plan, leading to a consensus that's just disastrous. And the third and final piece of this puzzle is the machine. You see, a leader never makes these decisions in a vacuum. They're sitting at the very center of this massive government apparatus, and it comes with all its own internal politics, competing departments, and intense public pressure that can shove a leader toward a decision that just isn't strategically smart. And here are just some of those pressures. The constant need to look tough for an upcoming election. There's the sunk cost fallacy, where you keep throwing good money after bad, pouring resources into a failing war just because you've already invested so much. And then there's the classic mission creep, where a tiny, clear objective slowly, almost silently, morphs into a massive, unwinnable one. Okay, so that's all the theory. The mind, the map, the machine. But what does this actually look like when the rubber meets the road? How do all these things come together to create a real-world disaster? So let's turn to the history books. Because this is where we see some of the most painful and costly lessons, where this kind of underestimation slams right into a very brutal reality. Just take the Korean War. The initial goal was crystal clear and super limited. Push the North Korean invaders back across the border. That's it. But early success, well, it bred overconfidence. And that's when the mission crept. Suddenly, the goal was to unify all of Korea. In doing so, they completely underestimated China's reaction. They thought they were just taking one more logical step up the ladder. But what they actually did was trigger a whole new, much bigger war. And here's the bottom line. What was sold to the public as a limited police action, that's literally what they called it, morphed into a brutal 3-year-long war with millions of casualties. It's just a tragic, stark reminder of the very real human cost when leaders get the risks of escalation this wrong. And if you want the absolute textbook case study for this kind of gradual disaster, you have to look at the Vietnam War. This timeline just shows it perfectly. It wasn't one single bad decision, it was a whole series of small, seemingly rational steps. First, it's just a few advisors. Then the president gets more power. Then the first ground troops go in. And step by step by step, it all adds up, dragging the United States into this unwinnable nightmare. So what was the absolute core mistake here? At the end of the day, it was a failure of imagination. U.S. leaders, kind of trapped by their own biases, they just couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that their adversary was willing to fight and die for their cause, no matter how high the cost. They just fundamentally misread their opponent's will to fight. Okay, looking back at these stories is, well, it's pretty grim, but it raises this incredibly important question. Can we do better? Is it possible to build systems that help our leaders avoid walking right into these same exact traps in the future?
And the answer, which is really fascinating, isn't about just hoping some perfect, bias-free leader comes along. I mean, let's be real, they don't exist. The real key is to build better systems and better processes around our leaders, to create guardrails that can protect all of us from the worst impulses of the mind, the map, and the machine.
So what do these guardrails actually look like? Well, this slide gives us a fantastic list. You have red teaming, where you literally assign a team to play devil's advocate and poke holes in your own plan. You have to actively encourage dissent, to create a room where people aren't afraid to say, I think this is a bad idea. You have to rigorously wargame every scenario to see what could go wrong. And maybe, just maybe, the most important one of all, cultivating intellectual humility. Just having this simple, powerful ability to admit that you might not have all the answers. This quote from the source material really just ties it all together so well. Prudence here isn't about being weak or being indecisive. True strength, real leadership, requires humility. It requires a relentless, unwavering commitment to understanding every single possible consequence before you take that first step up the ladder. And that leaves us with this one final, really tough question. When you consider the inherent chaos, the fog and friction of war, is perfect foresight even possible? Is it an impossible goal? Probably. But by understanding these traps that lead to miscalculation, maybe, just maybe, we can at least strive for wiser, more cautious, and more humble leadership. And in a world like ours, the stakes just couldn't be any higher.